It's Christina Herrick, produce editor for The Packer and host of Tip of the Iceberg. And I'm here with another episode. Joining me today is Matthew Aronson, Chief Revenue Officer of Verdant Technologies. Thanks for joining me, Matt.
Thanks, Christina. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, so we've had a couple conversations, and I remember sitting in a presentation at CPMA's sustainability event, and you were kind of talking about iceless broccoli, which I thought was kind of interesting. So, I think that's kind of what we're having this conversation around is some of the innovations that your company has brought to the produce industry. So, talk about let's start with ice and broccoli. Well,
Sure.
talk about the challenges. Like, why is ice and broccoli a problem?
Yeah, it's a great question to start. I maybe even before that, maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but we're talking about ice and broccoli with the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, so it feels like very very appropriate, at least in that regard. I ice, honestly, I think for myself and some of my colleagues, if you had asked me a few years ago what's the challenges with ice and broccoli, I might have answered something like I didn't realize there was ice in broccoli, or produce items like broccoli were shipped with ice. So I think for myself and for the team, there's been a process to learn and talk to folks in the industry and trying to understand some of the solutions we have. How can they help with some of the challenges? And in this case, it's ice with broccoli. And again, there's other items, not just broccoli,
Yes.
but we can at least focus on broccoli, and I can speak to that more firsthand. I mean, I think the challenges, if I had to rank them, probably depends on who you talk to, but I think when you think about a box of broccoli with ice in it, it's a 40-pound box where half of that weight roughly is ice. So you got 20 pounds of broccoli and 20 pounds of ice. And so I think principally one of the challenges is freight costs.
Yeah.
You're paying to ship water, ice, thousands of miles. So I think that's probably number one. It has been, I think, a real driver for adoption from some of our partners. But it goes, I think, what we've learned through this process over the last couple of years, it goes well beyond freight savings or kind of the challenge of kind of the freight cost. There's the water usage, 2.5 gallons plus per box. So you kind of do the math on that. There's just, it's one more thing for the grower, from an operational standpoint, making the ice, handling, et cetera. And then food safety and the risk associated, and also like worker safety and handling. And I think that's where, you follow something like this from the field all the way through the supply chain, and you run into these and you kind of have these light bulb aha moments, where in the DC from a retail standpoint, or even in the back of the store, where ice is melting, water is pooling, it's been a great solution. It's not to knock ice. I'm not here to, spread some anti-ice campaign necessarily. It has its place in different commodities and other uses, but just like anything, it comes with trade-offs. And so I think it's just trying to kind of understand those first and foremost, and then kind of balance out, where, and understand where our solution might fit in.
Well, and you think about why ice. Maybe I should have started asking you with why
Yeah.
ice. But it makes sense because at the time that it was integrated into shipping, we were trying to ship produce further away. You're trying to keep it fresh. It might be a warmer day when a piece of broccoli is harvested, and then you're trying to get it to the retailer in as great of shape as possible so it has as much shelf life there. And so it makes sense why ice makes sense, but it is interesting. So you kind of alluded to iceless
Yeah.
broccoli or iceless produce. So talk a little bit about what that is and what that looks for your company. Tell us about Harvest Hold, which is, I think, the iceless component. So
hmm
share a little bit about that.
Yeah, you're right. The company is Verdant Technologies, and the product that we've been, out now the last few years bringing into the industry is called Harvest Hold, and that is, I kind of describe it generally as a new spin on an old technology, which I think in general is a great framework for innovation. It's
Yeah.
something, proven, old, off patent. But how do you apply that or package that up in a different way? And so that's really what we've done with Harvest Hold, is I would say twofold. The innovation is this old technology I'm referring to, this gas 1 MCP that blocks ethylene and used for, a smaller number of commodities for decades. And really what, we've done here with Harvest Hold is unlock now the use in other commodities like broccoli. So the innovation being, how do you take this gas and print it on a sheet? And then number two, how do you allow for that slow release? And both are important, printing it on a sheet. So now think perforated paper towel roll, like in the kitchen. So it can be really easily torn off. It's an in-box solution applied right after harvest on the harvester in the broccoli field. And then once that sheet's in the box, it slowly releases that gas to block ethylene. And that's really the name of the game for us, not just with broccoli. And it's not just about ice. Ice is really, I think, kind of the big story surrounding broccoli. But broccoli, like other commodities we work in, the sweet spot or kind of that overlap of the Venn diagram, it's, commodities, fruits and vegetables that are ethylene sensitive. And while broccoli may not be a big ethylene producer, it's highly sensitive to ethylene, almost like think of it like a flour. And so it's around other types of produce or, other sources of ethylene in the supply chain. And so that means it's high respiring, it generates heat. So that's where ice, to your question, why it helps. Ice has helped, get it from point A to point B. And so that's where, we've been able to work with our grower partners all the way through retail to take the ice out. And what comes with that is a little, anxiety of, what's the trade-off there? Am I going to sacrifice freshness or shelf life? And through our tests and pilots with these folks, what we found is in fact, better quality on the other end. And importantly, removing all those other kind of unintended consequences that come from ice, which has been, I would say, the kind of historical solution to keep broccoli fresh in the supply chain.
Yes, and I know our viewers and listeners are well aware when you say 1 MCP. Anyone that's involved in packing is very familiar with the chemistry and what it's meant to post-harvest. So it is really interesting to hear how Verdant is taking that technology and finding a new way to use it where it's not, large storage rooms with a packing house with 1 MCP. You're making it more portable and really taking that produce then from packing all the way to grocer. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. And I phrased the question when I sent you over questions. I always like to give my guests a little bit of an idea of where to go. That way, I'm putting you on the spot sometimes, but that way you have a chance to think. But let's talk about what Harvest Hold in shipping means for the packer and then the retailer too, because I know you kind of talked about that weight. If it's broccoli with ice and it's 20 pounds of ice and it's 20 pounds of broccoli. But let's talk about when you remove that 20 pounds of ice, what does that mean for shipping? What does that mean for the retailer? I'm kind of interested in hearing about that part of it.
Yeah, great. And don't worry, Christina. I wake up every morning thinking about this and go to bed every night thinking about this. So it's always on my mind. There were no curveballs, at least that you sent me so far. So this is all fair game, and it's something I'm probably a little biased, but yeah, excited about and excited to talk about and share because I think for us one of the biggest challenges, just like anything new, any innovation, is education and helping folks understand what is it, how does it work. So this is why I'm always happy to talk about it. And for to your specific question, what does this mean for those grower shippers and for retail? I guess we can start kind of at that grower level. I mean, first and foremost, any solution like that, it has to be easy to apply. So I think for us, really importantly, this is, again, think paper towel roll tearing off. It's something that if you've been to a broccoli field or, we can link some pictures or videos below, but I mean, there's a harvester in the field and they're forming boxes and it's really neat to see. And this is something that is really seamless for the folks that are forming the boxes. So I think first and foremost, it's just really, integrates very seamlessly with their operation. I think what it means for the grower shipper, at least short term, is, for them, it's not, having to manage all that ice, making the ice, kind of storing it in their warehouse. And this is where, as the ice starts to melt, it starts causing issues. At their warehouse all the way through to the DC into the store. So, I think it avoids them having to kind of deal with those challenges associated with the ice, and then I think that's where if we're following the journey, the pallets get on the truck. So there's the weight, the freight savings to be had, and people kind of pay for and arrange freight and shipping differently depending on, who's the A and who's the B in terms of grower and
True.
receiver. But regardless, what you're talking about is rough numbers. If you go from a full load of uh, with broccoli, a full truckload with ice broccoli, about 1,000 cases. So you take that ice out, you instead of weighing out, you can now cube out and really, i.e., fill up that truck. So you go from about 1,000 cases to like 1,500. You pick up another 400 or 500 cases in the
Yeah.
same truck that you're paying for. So, the math on that in terms of a benefit is really, I think, has been compelling and straightforward for people to understand. Um, but I think the one thing as I was thinking about, leading into this conversation, Christina, that, outside of that, the benefits as it really flows through, there's the sustainability benefits. And certainly you maybe heard a little bit of that at last year's CPMA. We can talk more about that here, the water savings, lower carbon footprint to ship, et
Yeah.
cetera. I think the one thing, maybe that's the dimension of this story that we've found to be a really big benefit, and I think increasingly will be, is the worker safety, and just their comfort. It's a lighter box to lift up. First of all, like, it goes all the way through the store, so 40 pounds versus 20 pounds. It's not dripping water everywhere, and
Yeah.
you're not putting your hands in cold ice and, like, when you're digging for that drink at the bottom of the cooler kind of thing. So on a day-to-day basis, their hands are warmer and their backs are happier. But from like a more corporate level, I guess, when you think about kind of that grocery retail side, I think the slips and falls, like the worker safety, like, is a thing. And maybe this is not the sexiest topic, but you gotta you kind of do the research. The National Floor Safety Institute, the National Safety Council. I mean, the numbers are almost like unbelievable. Like, when you look at grocery retail, and again, this is really to your question: how does that benefit flow
Yeah.
through? Right? Because you talk to folks and it's like, well, we've been shipping broccoli for years and years. And listen, we're not here to, tell them how to grow broccoli. It's just, again, all those sort of unintended consequences that maybe come from what has been the traditional solution, and maybe there's a better way. So, again, this, you're kind of going down the tree diagram here, but these slips and falls from a worker safety standpoint and kind of the liability that comes from that. I mean, again, I'll rattle off a few statistics. But the average payout for a slips and falls incident in the US is about 50K.
Wow.
Okay, so there's that. Then you zoom out a little bit, 60% of all grocery retail claims are from slips and falls.
Oh my.
60%. And what does that mean from a dollar standpoint? It's like, on an annual basis, retailers are spending upwards of $450 million a year to defend slips and falls claims. Um, and okay, I'm a consumer. What is it? Why do I care about that? Well, you know, it's the statistic also that stood out to me is, like, for every dollar those retailers are spending on, just, let's say, floor care, cleanliness,
Yeah.
etc. For every dollar they're spending there, they're spending $3 on slips and falls. So,
Oh
like, you
my
think
god.
about the consumer, it's just the dollars. It's one of those. Certainly not for some, but it at least for me and for us, maybe as we were starting to peel back the layers here, it was like, wow, there's something here. And I think, importantly, Christina, one of the reasons why do I highlight that? Um, I think when you think about the supply chain of broccoli, for years and years, the majority of broccoli has been shipped on ice. But again, just like our product in and of itself was kind of not a new idea or a new technology, like, this idea of shipping iceless broccoli or other was in and of itself not a new idea. We've seen folks shift away from ice even before harvest hold. But what I would sort of posit, or what I would throw out, and conversations we have with folks are, well, sure, but at what cost? Again, that trade-off. So yeah, you've switched
Yeah.
away from ice. You're sacrificing quality and ultimately consumer experience. And so I think that's where, we you look at how the supply chain has kind of been trending. Not only that, I give you some numbers for, like, full truckloads, adding 400 or 500 extra boxes. Some of the feedback we get also, and for most folks, I'm sure, listening, they're like, well, not everyone brings in a full truckload of broccoli.
True.
And that's totally true. And so, well, I'm not getting all the freight savings. Well, that ice is still melting, whether it's, 6 pallets or 20 pallets. And I think that's where some of these other benefits, we've been challenged by our partners, which has been great for us. It's like, hey, I hear you on the freight savings. What else is there? How else can I understand this, or sort of, make this more compelling for my organization to make like a confident business decision to adopt this. And so that's where we've, in the spirit of partnership, kind of taken a step back, roll the sleeves up a little bit, and found and try to have tried to bring forward, some of our learnings and understandings with where, in this example, worker safety, there might be some
Yeah.
benefit.
So that makes perfect sense. And it's probably safe to assume that if they're spending what was it 400. I know that was your rough estimate. We're not doing
Hundreds of millions. I
hundreds of
mean,
millions of dollars. I mean, that has to go somewhere. So if we're talking about food costing,
yeah,
consumers are already concerned about food prices. If they're paying that much, it's likely got to go somewhere.
that's right.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
and we're starting with broccoli. There's other iced items. If you've
yep,
ever been in the kind of DC, there's broccoli next to often a lot of other iced items. Water's
yeah,
dripping. There's water over the floor. I've myself and some of my colleagues we've been doing some of these tests, over the years, I've seen them slip, on the water. I mean, it's you see the statistic, but then when you actually slip yourself or see your colleague slip, you're like, okay, there's maybe maybe there's something there.
yeah.
Yeah,
So you had talked about sustainability. So let's talk about sustainability first. Let's
sure.
talk about because that's part of where I got familiar with
Hmm.
the company, and what your company does is at a sustainability event. So you kind of talked about, you alluded to some data that you might have. So let's share that.
Yeah, right on. This is one of the things certainly near and dear to my heart, and I think as we think about the mission of our company, where we see the impact. I think solutions like ours in post harvest, I'm speaking generally in general terms first, but post harvest solutions, there's generally speaking that desire to add extra time to help reduce waste, that food waste, right?
Yeah.
And, maybe somewhat surprisingly, there is that component here we've seen, but really what we're doing here fundamentally, we're using the extra time that we provide to remove ice as an input. So at least when we started this to first order and, kind of aligning with our partners, it was like, hey, we're going to call success if the quality is the same, maybe better, but we don't have the ice to worry about. So that was like our at least initial measuring stick. What we have actually found though, we've seen better quality, and that's, why is that? Well, there's, ice melts at some point, it doesn't provide the benefit. You get ice burns. It's not perfect as a solution. So we've seen better quality and thus, lower waste or throwaway. So there is that component, but I think just widening that aperture a bit. I mean, from a sustainability benefit standpoint, it's not just the food waste. I think here really it's around the water savings, the
Yeah.
lower carbon footprint, those two. And so specifically, again, every box of broccoli, 20 pounds of ice, 20 pounds of broccoli, that's roughly 2.5 gallons per box, or 9 liters, depending on what unit system you use.
So
Um, it's a lot of water, and so you kind of multiply that through, and you start doing hundreds of thousands of boxes. You're talking, millions of gallons of water, that is just now able to be used for other things, growing other crops, etc. So that benefit people get really excited about. And then when you also think about, the just carbon footprint, I guess, and without getting like overly analytical, just you go from, now I can put 1,500 boxes on a truck versus 1,000, So now what used to take 3 trucks to deliver, now I can do it in 2. So you're taking a truck off the road to deliver
yeah,
the same amount of broccoli. So again, just from a macro standpoint, you take a truck, from overall emissions, et cetera, better to do it with 2 trucks than 3. And not only that, I think from a weight standpoint,
yes,
there's just from a fuel efficiency, and I think the number that's always in my head, like for every 1,000 pounds, you decrease your semi efficiency by like 0.5% or something like that. So,
go on.
there's efficiency to be gained. There's less trucks on the road. And so these are all benefits that, we're, I think, together with our partners, really, as we scale and we see that impact grow, working to quantify and share. And again, the whole education on how folks can understand how this fits in with their goals from a
Yeah.
sustainability standpoint.
That's fascinating. And I love that you came prepared with data. Thank you for that. It's always I love these conversations, but it's really nice to have some quantification, I guess you could say, in what you're saying. You could, we can have a conversation and you say, oh, well, this is sustainable and it does X, Y, and Z. But unless you have the data there to really back it up, it doesn't really, it's not as good of an illustration, I guess you could say.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's, well, probably the engineer in me, just the way my brain is wired. And I have to say, I mean, you've had just a number of great guests on this podcast, Christina. And just as an example of like data and how it makes it sticky and I can't forget it. This is back last year. You had Tom Adams from Pairwise, and it was a great conversation. But one of the things that stuck out to me and my friends or family who are listening to this are going to be laughing and rolling their eyes because they probably haven't heard me shut up about it since, is the statistic, the data point around
Yeah.
10% of people in the US eat enough fruits and vegetables every day. And I'm sure I've heard that and read that dozens of times, but just the way it was articulated, or the state I was in, maybe headphones on an airplane or something, I have not been able to forget it. I've been like obsessed about it since listening to that. And that's maybe a whole nother topic of conversation for another podcast, but
Oh yeah.
that's just burned in my brain. So I hope in a small way I can, some of these data points can resonate and maybe get the wheels turning for someone out there.
Yeah. Well, you're the first guest I've had that's actually quoted a podcast back at me. So
Oh,
I
wow.
wish I
Okay.
had like I need to create some kind of like gold star award and send out to guests. So for things like that, because that's impressive. And you're right. And actually I think the USDA, it's old data, but they just updated it. And I forget what the exact figure is, but I think uh, I think it's 40%. Let me see if I remember this. I think it's
Yeah.
40% of Americans eat less than 25% of the recommended fruit and vegetables.
Mm.
Which is, yeah, that's a whole other topic for a podcast and probably a story too.
Yeah.
But before we go down too many rabbit holes here,
Yeah.
I want to talk about food safety, because I know when we
Yeah.
talked, and I met you the first time, that was part of the conversation that we had. And I think you talked a little bit about it with like water quality and melting water and things like that. But I think that's another really interesting thing about Harvest Hold, is just the food safety component of it. Food waste, as we alluded to, is a big thing, but also, food safety is a big issue as well. So maybe share a little bit about what Harvest Hold does, in terms of food safety.
Yeah, I think simply stated, Christina, for us, it's really about the water. And
Yeah.
so when we remove all that water, the 20 pounds of ice and sort of that volume, 2.5 gallons per box. I mean, if you were to kind of follow that box through the supply chain, the melting water, ends up, there at the grower facility, and the trucks and the DCs in the back of the stores. And so really that food safety and where we provide the benefit, I guess, is by really helping, reduce or eliminate that water and everything that comes from that, the waterborne pathogens, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
there's nothing inherently about Harvest Hold, itself, but it's
Yeah.
just,
Sure.
as a result of using it, now you remove all that water from the equation. And so while that's, listen, I that's something that at least conceptually, we can understand, our partners can understand. I maybe in a few months or a year or so, we'll have a case study that really has kind of quantified, the reduction in incidents and whatnot. But I can tell you there's, at least a couple examples of folks, and one in particular is coming to my mind that, really came to us, not because they wanted to save money on freight, not because they wanted to, reduce the shrink, but because they were having some sort of course associated issues with the water and the ice from a food safety standpoint. So I think that tells me that, again, it depends on who you talk to and kind of where they're going to gravitate. But that was a great example for us of, let's make sure we, again, educate folks, not necessarily overplay our hand here, but really make sure, like, proudly and objectively, we make sure folks kind of have that on the radar, because for at least a couple of partners of ours, it's been a game changer.
Wow. No, that's great. And thank you for explaining it correctly. It's not that Harvest Hold has some magic food safety
Right.
property. But I think when we talked, you were talking about just, the fact that the water quality has to be so good for that ice. And then, as you alluded to, any other pathogen that might come along the way.
That's
So
right.
thank you for explaining it
Yeah,
as
sure.
eloquently as you did. Well, that's all the questions I have. Is there anything else you want to share?
I don't think so. Maybe you mentioned CPMA, and that was again almost a year ago. I think we're excited, and I'm excited, Christina, to not just see yourself, but other folks in the industry we're kind of starting, it seems like, to
Yeah.
kick up that we've got, as we're talking here, Fruit Logistica is winding down, and then we're starting to kick off all these shows here in the States. And I think I'm excited about that, not just in general to get back out and see folks, but there's been some exciting things we've been working on as well that maybe this is the last thing I'm saying, and it's a little teaser maybe, but there's more to the story, when it comes to Harvest Hall beyond broccoli. So there's other commodities we're excited about. And listen, there's other partnerships within broccoli or related to broccoli that we've been working very closely with over the last few months. And I'm looking ahead maybe to a couple of these shows where we may be sharing more on those partnerships, and again, some of these items we're working on. And again, the hope is just there's no silver bullet here, in this space, but where we're finding success, we want to be able to share that with folks, what's working, and hopefully continue to, drive adoption, not just for Harvest Hole, but, solutions kind of in this space, and have people, get people excited about that.
No, that's great. And you're right. I will resurrect my joke that I always say. If you say my name 3 times, I magically appear at a show. So that's highly possible that that will happen again this year. I know there have been several people that I've seen at, one show, then a couple weeks later, I see them at the next one, and they're like, "Oh, I can't believe you're here." I'm like, I'm everywhere. Not
Yep.
really, but yeah. So that's great, and I look forward to helping you share any of that information in the future. And sounds like you got some great things coming up.
Yeah. It's going to be an exciting year, and we're
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
Well, I just thank you so much for joining me. It's been a fantastic conversation. You're welcome anytime, especially someone who quotes back podcasts from more than a year ago. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I got to make sure I do my homework next time so I don't come empty-handed. So I'm gonna make a note of that.
Oh my gosh. No, this has been great. And I just want to thank all the listeners and viewers for tuning in. Don't forget, if you like what you hear, you can catch new episodes of Tip of the Iceberg on your favorite podcast platform like Google, Spotify, Apple, and more. And that's a wrap for this edition of Tip of the Iceberg, brought to you by the Packer Produce Market Guide and Farm Journal. Join us again soon for more industry insights. Bye.